The following program does not necessarily represent the views and opinions of Reality Radio 101, its advertisers and sponsors, or its listening audience. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the Bear Psychology Radio Show with psychologist, author, and speaker, Dr. Anna Baranowsky, where mind, mood, and what matters to you are discussed. We are broadcasting live from Toronto, Ontario, Canada, on Reality Radio 101. Get ready to talk, email, or post a message. We are looking forward to speaking with you and responding to your questions. And now, your host of the Bear Psychology Radio Show, Dr. Anna Baranowsky.
Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Anna Baranowsky with Bear Psychology, talking to you today about mood, mind, health. I really like the idea of leaning towards the truth in our lives and evolving into the best possibility of what we have to look forward to. I am looking forward today to two of my guests, both of whom I admire greatly. I'm looking forward to hearing from all of you in the audience as well. If you need to email or call in, we're looking forward to hearing from you. Certainly, I think if you want to send an email at instudio101@gmail.com. That's a great way to get in touch with us if you have a question and we can address it. And certainly our amazing guests today can help us with that. We have the remarkable Dr. Daniel Fisher, who is a medical doctor and a PhD. He is a psychiatrist, but he has a very interesting background, and we're going to talk about his emotional CPR, and I will explain a little bit about what that is shortly. And we also have Shontelle Prokipcak, and she is the director of the MASO and clinic in the Ottawa area that deals with mental health and addiction, and she does some remarkable work there. And I know that she's going to be bringing Dr. Fisher with his emotional CPR to the Ottawa area as well for some upcoming training. And certainly if people want information about that, Shontelle can talk a bit about when and how people can get engaged in that very important training, and I think you'll understand how important it is as we go forward in this presentation, because we're going to have the opportunity to hear about the approach directly from the source, Dr. Fisher, and I want to welcome both of you today to the conversation. Hi, Dr. Fisher.
Thank you.
Are you with us?
Yes, I'm right here, Anna.
Oh, great. That's great. And Shontelle, you're with us here right now as well, right?
Yes, I am. It's a pleasure to be here.
Excellent. I'm so glad. So what I want to start with is just saying, this whole idea of emotional CPR and training people to really help others through emotional crisis. So the training itself is for professionals who want to learn the skills to help people when they've experienced an emotional crisis. But I think it's a very unique program in that it really addresses what I think of as sharing the emotional space, like leaning into the emotional space that we all kind of share together, and rather than tensing or recoiling when something is troublesome, your language, it seems, in this program is C for connecting. The connecting process of E-CPR involves deep listening skills, practicing presence, and creating a sense of safety for the person experiencing crisis. P is empowering. The empowering process helps people to uncover the deep wisdom of their emotions, to learn mastery over their feelings, and to feel more hopeful and engaged in life. And R, revitalizing. In the revitalizing process, people discover or resume roles, relationships, and community connections that support living a full and gratifying life. And I just think that's really beautiful and remarkable. Now, I will just reference before we hear from our guests that Dr. Fisher has published a book called Heartbeats of Hope, The Empowerment Way to Recover Life. And one of the things that I want to mention is a couple of pieces right from the book. And Dr. Fisher, you say in the book itself, why did I write this book? And in the beginning, I wrote this book to show that I recovered from what is labeled by the mental health system as schizophrenia. Now, I think it's really remarkable. And, you know, part of the reason I'm really admiring you and your work so much is that you have found a way to both kind of stop the stigma. I mean, you're owning this history of yours and really saying what you've gone through. And then you found yourself as a professional within the field of mental health. And I just think those two things alone together are so remarkable. I wonder if you can help me to understand how you managed to navigate that label and how you found the way to both honestly share what's happening for you as well as become an advocate for people having the right kind of care.
Well, yeah, I'll try. I've actually just worked on my recovery without a plan ahead of time. And actually, each person's recovery, unfortunately, is individualized. So I was hospitalized in my 20s, and ironically, I was working as a biochemist at the National Institute of Mental Health, studying the neurotransmitters, dopamine, serotonin, because I really believed at that point that our emotions were determined by our chemistry.
Right.
That's hard for me to really believe, that I ever thought that way.
Mm-hmm. You've had a radical... You've had a radical shift in your thinking around that and that itself is remarkable because you were looking at the neurotransmitters, correct? Brain chemistry.
Yes, I was.
And then you had this kind of epiphany, this realization. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. Well, I was not only looking at the neurotransmitters, I was one of the sort of lead researchers in determining what regulated the biosynthesis of dopamine and serotonin. Mm-hmm. And it was partly through my own research that I came to the conclusion that there had to be a self. There I was working very deterministically and very determined on trying to find out what the critical regulation of these enzymes was. And I looked at many factors, oxygen, amino acids, pH, and what I started to find was everything influenced these enzymes. And I started scratching my head, especially when I saw that the enzymes were exquisitely sensitive to temperature changes. And I stepped back and looked at the result, and I said to myself, there has to be a self. That we can't expect the enzymes to run themselves. They need a larger organizing force. And that really needed to be at the level of the whole person.
Right.
Well, that conclusion was partly from my research, but also from my personal experience. Because simultaneous with this research, it was the late 60s, early 70s. I was undergoing my own transformation. I had unhappiness in my life. My wife left me. I was devastated. I think she left for good reason. Who wanted to be married to somebody who thought that every hope, every dream, every sign of love was due to some chemical change in the brain? And I literally did believe that. But I came to new conclusions in my unhappiness. I was in deep therapy 5 days a week, psychoanalysis. I also tried psychoactive drugs, as so many people were trying in the 60s. Just really trying to relieve my unhappiness. And one particular trip on mescaline, I suddenly realized that we're all connected. And I also realized that there's more time than I'd ever imagined. And those two conclusions led me also out of the laboratory. I wanted to really look at people. Unfortunately, along the way, I went into such an alternative reality that it was called catatonic schizophrenia.
This was after
really
all the use of...
decide.
Sorry, I just want to interrupt you for a minute. This was after the use of the psychoactive medicines that you were taking?
After the use of mescaline.
Mescaline, right. So you had a mind-altering experience, but it also sounds like it expanded your understanding of your life and your world, and it changed you from a very reductionistic individual looking at these enzymes and things that were being released in the brain as an explanation for who we are and how we function, and into a broader kind of view that we are connected in many deep ways to the emotional, energetic, psychological field of people around us. In fact, we know this to be more and more true.
I didn't really articulate it as clearly as you did.
Okay.
If I had, I might not have had to go into a hospital and understand it.
Well, I don't know. You know, I always find
blinded.
that it's really helpful for us to unfold in our own unique ways, because I mean, whatever lessons we need to learn, it's certainly not going to come by somebody else telling you that, this is how it works and you should get over it, right? That never works, right?
True.
Right. So we have
They
to.
tried to do that in my first hospitalization. They said, "Well, you shouldn't have taken that drug."
Right.
And
Okay.
my mother said the same thing. She said it was the drug. You shouldn't have taken the drug.
Right.
But in fact, it was within me, and the drug just sort of opened doors and windows that had been closed.
Mm-hmm. Right now,
the light was blinding.
Right now, we can see that there is a tremendous amount of emerging research actually on the use of MDMA and mescaline and ayahuasca and many different substances that people are using and looking at depression, anxiety, PTSD, and other stressors and disorders, addictions, and they're actually finding that the results are quite profound, quite remarkable in terms of life transformation and change. And it sounds like you kind of stumbled upon it, and it sounds like it led to a kind of crumbling of your belief system, but you somehow emerged from all of that.
Yeah, I decided that it really uncovered truth about the world and myself. And I needed to find a sort of more, gentle way to get there, and not so startling.
Well, it sounds like you kind of stumbled upon all of this without a lot of guidance, and that can be incredibly difficult. I think that's why a lot of the research early on psychedelics in the 60s were shut down, because they really were not well guided. And there are many cultures that have used psychedelics in their cultures for many years, but they have a whole infrastructure to handle that, whereas in North America, we're only just starting to put that infrastructure together and recognize the level of respect that these types of medicines require if we're going to use them therapeutically.
Yeah, at this point, if somebody comes to me and they've been using psychoactive drugs or psychedelics, I actually say be very careful. The insights can be profound, but they can be blinding. And but I can see with a guide who's been through the experience, and who could help you, during the period of revelation, to still remain in touch at least enough with one other person that you wouldn't go so deeply into your own reality that you couldn't come back. And in small ways, I see emotional CPR as that type of training for people. So I see emotional distress as sort of small revelations in one's day-to-day life. They can be induced without psychoactive drugs. They're induced just by the course of living amongst traumas and losses and disappointments, all kinds of stressors that we live with. And only one thing I would say about your introduction, and this emotional CPR is actually taught to everyone, because our belief, those of us that have what we call lived experience of recovery from extreme states or through extreme states, we believe that it's the work of every relationship that helps people to build a broader life and gain greater consciousness. And unfortunately, professionals, we teach it to them, but they're the hardest to teach.
Why is that?
Well, because what we've learned from our own experience, and we are a group of probably now 40 trainers, emotional CPR trainers worldwide, and we're continuing to learn, because none of this was written down ahead of time. How we asked ourselves, how can we be with somebody when they're in extreme distress, that in a way that allows them to move through that distress and learn from it, instead of trying to squelch it or see it as a sign of illness.
So I understand that you actually work in a lot of different organizations, and I know with Shontelle, she's bringing you into the Ottawa area. Shontelle, you told me an interesting story about how you met Dr. Daniel Fisher and what it was that inspired you to invite him to the Ottawa area. Can you talk about that a bit?
Sure. So we had been at a conference together where we were discussing and I was there brought in as a support person because we were discussing the topic of medical and physical restraints in the hospital settings, and how we could move to reduce the trauma that inflicts upon the people who are making or using the decision of restraint, and also those receiving it. So everybody in the continuum of that decision of using medical or physical restraints and the impacts that has on people. And Daniel was speaking there about some of the work that he has done in using connecting, emotional connecting, and this E-CPR as a method to reduce the number of restraints, physical and medical restraints, so medications, to help people get back to their stable space. And I was very inspired by that, and really connected with his presentation on that, and how important it is for us to not create traumas for others and not be the recipients of traumas, and how can we reduce that, and how can we connect emotionally to people who we would sometimes be a little bit afraid to move closer to or lean into because we're not sure that we can help. Or we're not sure that we know how to help, or we don't know how to connect with somebody.
Right. Sometimes
suffering.
It's just being present, and I love that you put that in there, Daniel. This presence is like such a crucial piece. And when we, as I was saying before, if we recoil or we tense, we create an atmosphere that closes down connection. I'm just going to read from this email that we just got from Helena Taylor. She is working in NHS. I think that is the National Health System. And I'm going to just read what she says because it fits so well. I'm seeing wards. Oh, can you just go down, back up to the top, Gary? Thank you so very much. I'm seeing wards. I think she's talking about hospital wards being pushed to their absolute limit. We're currently 15% understaffed, and we're verging into unsafe treatment. We lost 4 full-time nurses on one ward who left because of Brexit, so I guess she's in the UK. We're really struggling to recruit. Now, this is so interesting because I think this is exactly what you're referencing, Shontelle, just this idea that things can get so tense that instead of actually being able to have a human connection and stay, present with somebody when they're going through something really difficult, we get closed down and rigid. I know that my husband is listening to this radio show today, and he's a nurse in a cardiology unit, and he's also worked in emergency. And I remember many stories that he explained to me, and he's a particularly nice-natured guy, so he explained to me a number of situations where, things could get very, very tough on the unit. And his tendency was, when somebody was really, really struggling emotionally, was to really kind of show up for that person and to really try to figure out, how am I going to talk to this person so that they know I'm here, they're hearing me, and if there are options, I tell them what the options are so that they can make a choice for themselves, and that they can know that a real person is showing up in real time for them. Like it really speaks to this whole emotional CPR on the ground thing. What do you think about that, Shontelle, in terms of what you've heard so far?
I think it's so true that I think we get stuck in the challenges of connecting, and the time that it takes and the cost that it takes, to just step back and not try to fix it immediately, but to attend to. Mm-hmm. And that this is kind of an epidemic in our society, as well as in the healthcare system. So, leaning in and doing that, I think it's scary, but it's empowering for not just the individual experiencing the crisis, but for those of us who are supporting someone who's in crisis, whether you're a clinician or a family member or a loved one, a community member.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Fisher, can you tell us a little bit about how that first step, the connecting step, works, how you teach that, how you get that message across and help people to really use it in real time?
Sure. People do like the idea of sort of linearity of connecting and empowering and then revitalizing. And those are important aspects of being with somebody, which you both described very well. In fact, we picture it visually as sort of a spiral. And if you can imagine, the C generally does come first. So how do we connect first, especially with somebody who's in acute distress? And many of us hark back to when we were in that most distress. What did we want? What did we respond to? And I personally spent 6 weeks at one point mute, not speaking words at all. And what I kept thinking to myself, if someone else had been in this state, they'd know how to reach me. And unfortunately, the higher you went up the food chain, that's what my secretary used to call the chain of influence, the higher you went up, the less likely someone could connect, which is tragic and difficult. It means in certain ways we're training out of people the most fundamental aspects of connecting. Over and over again, I noticed that it was the less clinically trained people who reached me, and I really was yearning to be reached on an emotional level. Right. I really literally was thinking to myself, words have lost all meaning.
Wow. So
but
it's
a smile, a gesture, a tone, eye contact. These were what I responded to.
Yeah, we're hungry for that sense of...
I was hungry for that.
Mm-hmm. I think that's true actually in general, that, especially with all the social media, I think there's a huge hunger in our culture. And I think that, if we really contemplate, these terrible episodes that we've encountered in the last number of years, where people have just done some horrible social acts of violence, and then it makes me kind of think about what is happening with this individual, that their despair and sense of disconnection from the larger human community would allow them to take some, actions like that. I just contemplate that what a profoundly important thing for us to, recognize what you're saying about just the hunger, the need for human connection, and how important it is for us to continue to make that front and center. We're supposed to be all part of a larger human community, and so many of us feel disconnected and alone, sad, frightened, and yet, like you said, we're connected.
Let me say a word about reaching somebody also.
Yes, please.
So I was in Puerto Rico, and I do this training all over the world, actually. And so this was in Spanish. I had a translator. My Spanish isn't that good. But this was after Maria, the hurricane, and people were in very distressed state of mind. And I was teaching people so they could help each other. Well, there was a clinical director of a hospital who was attending the training, and I was very glad he was there, because I want to reach clinical people. But I said at one point, it's better to avoid questions. When someone is in distress, questions tend to feel like attacks. have you been sleeping? Have you been eating? Do you think of taking your life? All these, when they're at the outset especially, they make one recoil inside in fear. What if I say the wrong thing? What are they thinking? And it also makes you feel out of control, as the person asking the question is setting the agenda.
Mm-hmm.
So you're already feeling out of control, and you're feeling frightened. Questions, big mistake.
That is such an interesting comment, because I think, it taps so closely into this area of judgment and shame that I think can get really out of control, especially when we're feeling already vulnerable, that we're not feeling the softness of human connection. That's really helpful. Thank you.
So this clinician, clinical director actually, he threw up his hands and said, "Oh my gosh, how can I have a conversation? I only know how to have conversation by using questions." Of course, there was another question. And I said to him, this is good challenge that you're asking, because some of it is unspoken. How do we connect without questions and without pursuing a story? So we've come up with 4 elements of connecting with somebody without asking questions or pursuing a story. And one of them, to begin with, is your facial expression and your body posture and your hand gestures. They're all being taken in. And so try to be aware, not in a inauthentic way, but just be aware of what you're feeling while you're with the person, and try to be able to express some of that feeling in gestures, facial expression, tone of voice, and also where are you feeling it in your own body? If I'm with somebody and they're telling me something very scary, I might feel some tenseness in my stomach. Wow, being with you right now, I'm feeling some tightness in my stomach. And you'd be very surprised. The person may not realize that they're frightened, but once they hear that you're actually having a response in your own body, maybe tightness in your shoulders with somebody who's anxious. It might be a heaviness in your breathing, a sign that you notice yourself, wow, that made me sigh. And reflecting on that, not that they made you do it, and not that you know how they're feeling, but just in being with them at that moment, this is your human response. It has a remarkable effect of helping the person to identify their own emotions.
That's beautiful. That's this whole thing of the shared emotional space and really giving it a very practical way for that to come alive. So that really, such a small little nugget of, it's like a gem, for people who work with people, right? It's so important.
Yeah. Well, you have to know your own self.
You have to be accepting of your own self. Yes, and absolutely.
Accepting of your own self.
Yeah, a lot of us don't like to feel what we feel, so we guard ourselves from our own inner world. And it seems to me that you've really taken a journey so that you know your inner world. And it sounds like that has really helped you formulate a lot of what you're working with right now. I'm going to just read through a couple of these emails that we have right now.
Okay.
This one says, "Hi, Dr. Anna, what a fabulous show." That's to you and Shontelle, Dr. Fisher and Shontelle Prokipcak. So yes, you are amazing. And Hannah is asking, do your guests have websites that we can go to? Thank you. And yes, I should just call out that we do have a YouTube channel where I do post a lot of this material, and there's over 200 videos at youtube.com/whatisPTSD. That's all one word. Or you can go to one of the websites, which is whatisptsd.com, or to our LinkedIn account, which is you can find through our website, whatisptsd.com. And if you link in with us, certainly one of my staff would let you know if there's some space for guests, and we're always happy to talk to you. So thank you so very much, Hannah, for your comment and question. And then there's another one I see up here as well.
Might I mention one thing about
Yes.
we have a website for emotional CPR?
Oh, please do. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah. So it's www, which I guess we don't even use anymore, emotional-cpr.org. And on it you can find also videos and introductions.
Oh, yes, and I want to actually mention that because you have a couple of videos. One is like right at the front on your homepage, and it is such a great example of kind of that leaning towards emotion as it comes to the surface, and what a big difference you're making for the people that you're talking. And Shontelle, can you speak a bit about your upcoming course, because I think that people might be interested in that and how they would find out.
Yes, absolutely. So we are hosting Daniel and one of his colleagues to come and do the training for emotional CPR for the first time in Canada. And we're hoping to do a couple of things there. So in addition to having Daniel there, Dr. Fisher helping us out, we're hoping to create, grow this program that he's offering here in, not just in Ottawa, but overall. One of my goals at MASO, Mental Health and Addiction Services of Ottawa, is to also reach out to rural and remote communities, because I think that, they have such a challenge in getting services and receiving services, that I see his program as something that might be of great value to communities that don't have access to as many services, and where they can work on healing together and attending to each other. And so we're doing that program October 11th and 12th. We added a third day, the 13th, to just talk about how we can mobilize Dr. Fisher's E-CPR program here in Canada. So those who come to our program will be a part of that discussion on the Saturday as well.
Oh, that sounds
more information about it, you can go to our website, which is mhaso.ca, and that's maso.ca here in Ottawa. And that would be a way of checking in and seeing if you're interested in coming to the program.
Oh, well, that's wonderful, and I'm so glad that you're bringing it to Canada, and maybe we'll figure out if there is enough interest. We'll bring Dr. Fisher to Toronto as well. Who knows? I mean, that might be a very great thing to do. It just sounds like you're tapping into something so important. I also find it really interesting, Dr. Fisher, that you kind of recognize that it was the people who were not trained professionally who seemed to be the most helpful for you when you were suffering the most. Like they were coming with something that was very human rather than something that was clinical. And I think this whole idea of asking questions, because, as a clinician, you get taught, to really go to that, open-ended question rather than share the emotional space, and that can really fail and really not really offer people what they need in the most vulnerable moments in life. And I think you're raising an issue that a lot of people don't really think about.
It's hard to explain this to clinicians in a way that they don't feel defensive. And I'm a psychiatrist. I went through clinical training, although I was critical of what I was being taught. But I could only be so outspoken as a trainee. I think I did stress some of my supervisor because my approaches were very unconventional. And for instance, I knew from my own personal experience that if someone was sitting on the floor, it was probably a good idea to try to sit down next to them on the floor, literally at their same level. And my supervisors were a little shocked, but then I pointed out to them I could reach people, and they were puzzled. They didn't understand because I did not disclose at that point my own experience. I think the other thing that, and you all have touched on this, that prevents people from sharing sort of a human response is, and the training says be a blank wall, or don't share because that'll interfere with the other person. And we're not saying telling your whole life story or take over the conversation, but just be a human being who's authentic, responding to another human being in their authenticity.
How shocking.
And we find we have also resonators. So we do real plays. It's very experiential training, and training is really not the right word, experience, over a 2-day period. So people should be prepared to know that we encourage people to share something of themselves during this training experience. And when we do a real play, we call it, not a role play, we ask someone to sort of recall some distressing experience. Maybe it's something they're even going through at the moment. Not deeply distressing, but distressing. And then we have another person assist them in a way that enables them to share some of that feeling. Well, inevitably, the person assisting the first time will give advice. You know, why don't you take some deep breaths? You know, you're feeling anxious. Okay, take some deep breaths. Or, you know, let's imagine you're at the seaside. Visualization. All these helpful suggestions, which actually tend to be disconnecting because it isn't coming from the person themselves who's going through the distress. So we'll ask the person who's in the assisting role and just made this very helpful suggestion. What are you feeling at this moment? You know, I'm just curious. What's going on inside when you made this suggestion that they do deep breathing? And almost inevitably, the person who made the suggestion experiencing their own distress. They're experiencing their own distress.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't want to experience that distress, so they try to reduce the other person's distress.
Or they go into a helping mode, right? Because that helping mode, it elevates us and pulls us away from the real thing that is occurring in the moment.
Exactly.
The being present with what's happening. In your book, and I'm going to really encourage people to pick up a copy of Heartbeats of Hope by Dr. Daniel Fisher, but in your book on page 185, you have this beautiful image of a recovery dialogue, and like there's 6 people in a circle, and you can see their hearts, their warm hearts, and it's like a direct connection, heart to heart. And then the words, enter a neutral place and respect differences, use your authentic voice, suspend beliefs. I just wonder if we were all able to do that in our human relations. Wow, what would really happen? Like, what kinds of relationships could we actually forge, and how much more nourishing would those be for us? Because, it's this whole place where we have so much hunger and loneliness. This idea that we could actually have relationships that are heart-based first, that we can be warm in our own hearts first. I think that is I think you're bringing something forward that is so needed. And I really want to thank you for your efforts in that way. I'm going to actually reference another email that just came in. People are liking this topic a lot. So Alexis just says, wow, what a great topic. If only people knew. Thanks for the topic. I wonder what Alexis is thinking as she's hearing this part of the conversation, because it really does kind of resonate with people, I think, this idea that you're kind of just raising. What could happen to us if we had these really beautiful, profoundly important, meaningful conversations that we leaned towards instead of leaned away from? That if, when people go to see a professional, whether it's in a hospital, an emergency room, the doctor's office, to see a clinician, if the whole point was like really just being in that moment and really connecting in a meaningful way.
One thing also I think that it will help reduce is substance abuse.
Mm-hmm. Talk to that, please.
I think the essence of the problem behind substance abuse is disconnection. And this Johann Hari has written a book, Chasing the Screen, about the sources of addiction. And he says the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. And there's a study done, I think it was a Canadian psychologist named Bruce Anderson. It was done in the 70s. It's called the Rat Park.
Okay.
And he redid a study that had been done. Bruce Alexander, excuse me. He redid a study that had been done on rats. One of the proofs, supposedly, that addiction was due to individual vulnerabilities and due to nature of a drug. And in other words, just sort of a chemical reaction within the rat. One of the studies was that they take rats in isolation, and they would give them a choice. They could either drink water that had cocaine in it,
mm-hmm.
or they could drink regular water, and they had access to food. And they found the rats would take the cocaine laced water to such a great extent that they'd starve to death. They would neglect everything else.
Mm-hmm.
So they thought, well, see, it's just a chemical reaction.
Mm-hmm.
Just a chemical in the rat's brain. Well, he repeated the experiment, and he said, what if instead of the rats being in isolation, they were in a community? So he created a rat community with lots of, toys and interaction between other rats. Called it the Rat Park. And he repeated the experiment with the cocaine water, the regular water. And the rats who were part of the community weren't really that interested in the cocaine.
That makes perfect sense to me.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
They weren't having to treat their pain, their disconnection pain.
I'm going to have to do some more research on that as well, because I think there's something very crucial about the way we live in our own little boxes and how that has created this enormous epidemic of a kind of emotional crisis in our world. And I know that there are growing communities that are more intentional, not communes, but communities, and how they do seem to have a profound effect on, how we feel. But that's such a great example, and it really kind of frames well, your work and the importance of what you have to say. And I'm really grateful for you coming on and spending the time with us. I wonder if there's any final words you want to say, Shontelle, about just, what is inspiring you in this work. And then also if we could hear that very briefly from Dr. Daniel Fisher.
Okay. So what I think the emotional connection is a piece that I've recognized in my work as well, both as a clinician, but also I run these recovery groups on the weekend here at my office, and the sense of belonging is a really important part of the group, and telling people that they're in the right place and them getting that support from each other, and sharing with each other and attending to each other without advice giving, and just helping each other process what their week has been huge. And it has grown exponentially, the group, around that. And people take turns, co-facilitating the group. And that is, for me, that emotional connection, that piece of belonging, knowing you belong exactly where you stand, that you're a part of something, I think is a huge part of all recovery from any mental health or substance abuse issue. And that's why the emotional CPR so connects with the work that I've already been doing. And I was delighted to meet Daniel and say, well, let's try this, see if we can get this up and running here in Canada and get more people connected that way, and create a community and an experience around helping each other.
Thank you.
And so that's where we're at Masso, and what we're doing, and we're really looking forward to seeing Daniel in October.
Magnificent. Thank you for joining us, Shontelle, at Masso. And if you want to get in touch with Shontelle or learn more about the training, you can go to Masso, MHASO.ca. And let's hear finally from Dr. Daniel Fisher. Any last words that you want to share?
Well, I just would echo what Shontelle said. Our goal overall is to have something we call community CPR, which is really everyone ideally learning these principles. I think there'd be more world peace, less violence, less substance use, more positive growth of human potential. Because at this point, I feel like we're held back from all that we could create and all we could be.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. So if you want more information about Dr. Daniel Fisher's work, you can go to power, the number 2, power to you, just the letter U.org, or you can go to ncmhcso.org for a lot of download sheets and information. But we will have the material available to people if they want more information. And I want to just thank everybody so much for what you've shared with us today. And I want to just remind people about what we've got here. This is all about emotional CPR, and it's a real focus on public health education to teach individuals, both to address their own emotional crisis as well as the potential work they may have to do with others. So if you're involved in some kind of work where you're helping, or you're running a group, this would be a really pivotal training. And I do see it's October 11, 12, and 13 in Ottawa. Fantastic. And it is emotional CPR that really focuses on inclusiveness, collaboration in community, and incorporates trauma-informed care, counseling after disasters, peer support, emotional intelligence, suicide prevention, and cultural attunement. And remember, it is, C, connecting. The connecting process of E-CPR involves deep listening skills, practicing presence, and creating a sense of safety for the person experiencing a crisis. P, empowering. The empowering process helps people to uncover the deep wisdom of their emotions, to learn mastery over their feelings, and to feel more hopeful and engaged in their life. And R, revitalizing. In the revitalizing process, people discover or resume roles, relationships, and community connections that support living a full and gratifying life. Now, I want to just mention that this whole idea of crisis as a universal experience, and I want to just end on that because it's one of these really crucial pieces where emotional crisis is universal. Now, I mean, it's one of the really core things that I think, because I believe that, trauma, which is the place that it's the lens throughout which I look at a lot of different things. Trauma is kind of the great human equalizer. We all experience something that we haven't been able to get over, and we have to find ways to normalize our experience and realize that, this is all a very human experience, and there's nothing that makes us different from anybody else. It's something that Daniel was saying right at the beginning of the show, that he realizes that, we're all kind of connected. So we might as well have a deep sense of respect for each other, and a sense of being in this present moment can help us more and more to do that. So we are going to wrap up. I want to thank everybody for a fantastic show, and have a gentle day.
Thank you for listening to the Beer Psychology Radio Show with psychologist, author, and speaker, Dr. Anna Baranowsky, right here on Reality Radio 101.